What if the woman standing in traffic court wasn't just fighting a ticket, but fighting the exact moment her whole family could fall apart? Drop a comment telling us what you think Judge Caprio should do before you hear the full story, because the last thing he says to this mother will leave the entire room in stunned silence. At first, she looks angry, guilty even. Then everything changes. And if you believe real justice needs both truth and compassion, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is one of those moments you never forget. By 9:12 a.m. on a wet Tuesday in Providence, Rhode Island, Courtroom 3 at the municipal court was already full. You could hear the scrape of cheap metal chairs on tile, the shuffle of thick case folders, and the low buzz of people rehearsing excuses under their breath. The fluorescent lights made everyone look a little tired and a little older than they probably were. Near the back, a clerk in a navy cardigan called out case numbers in a voice so practiced it sounded mechanical. A Dunkin' cup sweated on the edge of the prosecutor's desk. A bailiff named Frank DeLuca stood near the rail, hands folded, face unreadable, watching every movement like he'd seen every kind of disaster come through those doors. Then the doors opened again, and all the whispering changed direction. The woman who stepped inside looked like somebody holding herself together with stubbornness alone. Her name was Marisol Vega. She was 34 years old, 5'3", and moving with the rigid energy of someone who had not slept enough in weeks. She wore black Skechers with a split seam near the toe, faded Old Navy jeans, and a burgundy puffer coat that had lost most of its stuffing at the shoulders. Her hair was tied up in a fast, uneven bun, and one side had started slipping loose. She carried a manila envelope so overstuffed with papers that the brass clasp wouldn't close. In the crook of her arm was a toddler backpack with a smiling cartoon fox on it, and around her wrist hung a set of keys attached to a blue plastic tag that read 2008 Toyota Sienna. Like this video, if you believe the hardest stories never look dramatic from the outside. And before we go any further, share this with someone who needs to see that one courtroom decision can change more than just a case number. When Clerk Sheila Martin called, Case TR 26417, City of Providence versus Marisol Vega, Marisol didn't flinch. She walked to the front with her chin lifted too high, the way people do when they are trying not to let humiliation touch them. Judge Frank Caprio looked down from the bench, glasses low on his nose, hands folded in front of him, calm, steady, famous for seeing what others missed. But even he took a second look when Marisol set that bulging envelope on the podium and said, before he could speak, I know how this goes. You tell me I should have followed the rules, and I tell you I was trying to keep my kids alive, and then I leave owing money I do not have. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. One man actually sighed out loud. Marisol heard it, turned her head, and gave him a look sharp enough to cut glass. That was the first moment people thought they had her figured out. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture her. He just said, Ms. Vega, if you've come here to be heard, I'll hear you. But if you've come here to fight everyone in the room, you'll lose before we begin. It was such a simple line, but it landed like a gavel strike. Even Marisol blinked. The city's citation was straightforward on paper. On December 14, 2025, at 2:17 a.m., Officer Ryan Donnelly issued Marisol a $185 citation for parking in a clearly marked emergency access lane outside the pediatric entrance at Hasbro Children's Hospital. The file also showed an expired inspection sticker, a lapsed registration renewal, and a failure to appear at her initial hearing in January, which brought the total due to $427.50 with fees. $427.50. To some people in that room, it was annoying. To Marisol Vega, it was the distance between keeping her car and losing the only system that held her family together. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever known what it feels like to have one bad week turn into a problem so big it starts chasing you. Judge Caprio glanced at the file, then at Marisol. You failed to appear in January. I was at Rhode Island Hospital with my mother after her stroke therapy appointment ran long, Marisol shot back. You have documents. She slapped the top of the envelope. I have documents for everything. That's all my life is now, papers proving I'm not lying. There it was again, that edge in her voice, defensive, tense, almost combative, and in the gallery you could feel something ugly rising, that familiar human instinct to decide someone's character from the first 30 seconds. Everyone saw the same things. A woman late on paperwork, L. 8 on fees, standing before a judge already talking back. The body language didn't help. She stood with crossed arms between answers. She interrupted twice in the first minute. When the clerk asked her to speak clearly for the record, she gave a bitter half-laugh and muttered, "For the record, I'm broke." If the story had stopped right there, half the internet would have called her disrespectful. But stories like this never stop where people think they should. Marisol Vega lived on Messer Street in Providence's West End in a third-floor walk-up that shook every time the downstairs tenant slammed the building's front door. She had 5 children. Kayla, 15, who wore her hair in tight braids and acted older than any teenager should have to. Jadon, 12, who loved the Celtics and tried to be the man of the house, even though he still slept with a fan on because silence made him anxious. Mateo, 9, who had severe asthma and a rescue inhaler in every coat he owned. And the twins, Lily and Luna, age 4, who could fall asleep anywhere if they were warm enough. Marisol also cared for her mother, Elena Vega, 61, who had partial weakness on her left side after a stroke the previous spring. Marisol worked nights sanitizing surgical tools for a contractor at Kent County Memorial Hospital in Warwick and picked up grocery delivery shifts during the day when gas money allowed it. She slept in scraps, 45 minutes here, an hour there, sometimes in her parked van outside school pickup. She had once been the kind of person who color-coded lunch schedules and cut sandwich crusts into shapes. Now she was the kind of person who prayed the van started on the first turn of the key. Drop a comment telling us if you've ever watched someone get judged before anybody knew what they were carrying, because that is exactly what was happening here. Judge Caprio asked Officer Ryan Donnelly to step forward. Donnelly was in his early 40s, close-cropped hair, dark uniform pressed flat, body cam clipped to his chest in the footage still attached to the city file. He didn't come off as cruel. He came off as tired and procedural. The kind of officer who had been cursed at enough times to strip emotion out of his reports. He testified that at approximately 2:17 a.m. on December 14, he saw a gray Toyota Sienna stopped in the red-striped pediatric emergency lane with hazard lights on, no driver in the seat, and 2 children visible in the rear row. He waited 90 seconds, checked the entrance, and was about to call for a tow when Marisol came running out carrying a paper wristband packet and shouting that her son needed treatment. Was the emergency lane blocked? Judge Caprio asked. Yes, Your Honor. For how long? Just under 11 minutes total from my first timestamp to vehicle movement. A low murmur rippled across the courtroom. 11 minutes. Suddenly the room leaned away from Marisol, emotionally speaking. 11 minutes in an emergency lane sounded different from a desperate 30-second stop. Marisol grabbed the podium tighter. I didn't leave those babies alone for 11 minutes. My oldest was in the van with them. Officer Donnelly checked the report. I could see 2 small children in the back. I did not see an adult. My daughter was bent over because my son was throwing up into a towel. That got quiet, very quiet. Judge Caprio looked to the clerk. Do we have the body camera? We do, Your Honor. And just like that, the whole room knew this was no longer going to be a routine ticket hearing. You could feel it in the silence, in the way even the man who'd sighed earlier sat up straight. This was the kind of moment people later describe by saying, everybody in the room knew something bigger was about to happen. Before that footage played, Judge Caprio asked one more question. Ms. Vega, why didn't you call for help from staff before leaving the vehicle where it was? Marisol's jaw tightened. For the first time, her voice came out quieter. Because my son couldn't catch his breath, and when you hear your child making that sound, you stop thinking in complete sentences. There are lines that sound scripted. That one didn't. That one sounded torn out of somebody's worst night. The monitor flickered on. Grainy bodycam footage filled the screen mounted beside the bench. The timestamp read 02/1742. Rain ticked against the officer's microphone. Red lights from the emergency entrance reflected across the wet pavement. There was the Toyota Sienna, crooked in the lane, rear bumper held by two strips of silver duct tape. One taillight was cracked. A Dora the Explorer blanket covered part of the back seat. Officer Donnelly approached the passenger side and shined his light inside. Two little girls were sleeping sideways, heads touching, in puffy winter coats. A boy around 12 was leaning across the seat. Then the camera angle shifted, and just for a second you could see another figure lower down, almost hidden, a teenage girl. Marisol had been telling the truth. Share this with someone who needs to remember that a camera can reveal guilt, but it can also reveal context. The officer on screen said, "Ma'am, sir, is there an adult in the vehicle?" The teenage girl looked up, face pale, and said, "My brother can't breathe." Then the camera turned toward the automatic doors, and there came Marisol, sprinting back out with a tiny plastic hospital basin in one hand and a wrinkled admission paper in the other. Her hair was down. Her coat was half open. She looked terrified. And then the worst part happened. On the body cam, before the officer could even speak, Marisol yelled, "Write the damn ticket if you want. I'm not moving till somebody helps my son." She said it loud, angry, defiant. The exact kind of clip that, cut short and posted online, would make millions of strangers call her irresponsible without a second thought. A couple people in the gallery actually shook their heads. One woman whispered, "Oh no." But the footage kept going. Officer Donnelly said, "Ma'am, you can't block emergency access." Marisol shouted back, "Then open another lane. My son is turning blue." Judge Caprio leaned forward. On the screen, a nurse in teal scrubs rushed out with a wheelchair. Marisol waved frantically toward the van. The officer followed, and as the camera got closer, the audio picked up a sound so raw it seemed to make the whole room forget to breathe. A child wheezing, not coughing, not crying, wheezing with that strained, high, hollow pull that sounds like the body has forgotten how to work. The boy in the van, Mateo, was hunched forward, lips parted, face damp, eyes wide with panic. The teenage girl, Kayla, kept saying, "Breathe with me, baby, breathe with me, slow, slow." No one in that courtroom looked at Marisol the same way after that. Judge Caprio asked for the video paused. He removed his glasses. "How old was your son at the time?" "9. How is he now?" Marisol swallowed. "He's alive." That was it, 3 words. No drama in how she said them, no performance, just the exhausted truth. He's alive. And somehow those 3 words carried a whole history inside them. Ambulance bills, pharmacy pickups, nights without sleep, fear in winter air. The kind of fear that teaches a mother to hear danger in the rhythm of a child's breathing from across an apartment. The judge nodded slowly, but he wasn't done. Officer Donnelly, was the vehicle still obstructing the lane once medical staff came out? Yes, briefly. Another vehicle entering had to swing around. Was any ambulance delayed? Not an ambulance, Your Honor. A patient drop-off sedan did have to reroute around. There it was, the first revelation that changed everything. Marisol's desperation was real. Her son's emergency was real. But there had also been a consequence. Someone else's access had been impeded. The law wasn't imaginary. The lane existed for a reason. That was what made the room hold still. This was no longer about whether Marisol was lying. It was about whether a true emergency erased a dangerous choice. And that is where stories get hard. Like this video, if you believe the strongest justice stories are the ones where right and wrong are not neatly packaged for us. Judge Caprio asked Marisol to open the envelope. Inside were documents bent from being carried too long. A pediatric pulmonary report from Dr. Naomi Feldman at Hasbro, an after-visit summary, prescription receipts for albuterol solution and steroid medication, a school attendance notice for Mateo, a physical therapy schedule for Alina Vega, 3 pay stubs, a shut-off warning from Narragansett Electric, registration renewal mail opened but unpaid. And at the bottom, folded so tightly the crease had turned white, was a handwritten note in blue ink. "What is that?" the judge asked. Marisol hesitated. "Just something my daughter wrote." "May I see it?" She froze. For the first time the brave, brittle shell cracked. "I'd rather not." Judge Caprio looked at her carefully. "You may keep it if you wish." But Kayla, sitting in the second row now that everyone had noticed her, stood up. She was wearing a gray hoodie from classical high school and white sneakers, with the sides scuffed dark from city sidewalks. She looked both embarrassed and determined, which is a combination that can break your heart if you've ever seen a child forced to become too adult too early. "It's okay, Ma," she said. "He can read it." Frank DeLuca passed the note forward. The paper trembled between his fingers because Marisol's hands were shaking so hard she'd almost dropped it. Judge Caprio unfolded it and read silently for a second. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that the room leaned in. "Would you like me to read this aloud?" Marisol covered her mouth. Kayla nodded yes. The judge read, "Mom, if they take the van, I can quit dance and walk the twins to school, and Jadden can stop basketball and I can get a job after school. Please don't cry in front of the little girls. Love, Kayla." A sound moved through the courtroom that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a sigh. It was that involuntary human reaction when private pain suddenly becomes public truth. One woman reached for a tissue in her purse. The man who'd sighed earlier looked down at his lap. Judge Caprio placed the note on the bench as if it were fragile glass. "How old is your daughter?" 15, Marisol whispered. "And she wrote this because she thought you might lose the van over this matter." Marisol nodded. "The notice said if I didn't resolve everything by April, they could suspend and tow if found on the street with expired registration." Now the ticket had changed again. It wasn't just about a fine. It was about transportation, job access, pharmacy runs, stroke therapy, school pickup. 5 children and 1 grandmother in a city where losing a car doesn't sound like tragedy until you realize exactly how many ordinary survival tasks depend on it. The prosecutor asked to clarify the outstanding amounts. Clerk Sheila Martin read from the ledger. Original emergency lane citation, $185. Inspection violation, $90. Failure to appear fee, $125. Administrative costs, $27.50. Total due, $427.50. Marisol gave a tired laugh that had no humor in it. "That's my gas, groceries, and school uniforms for the month." Judge Caprio tapped the file lightly. "And yet, Ms. Vega, we still must address the facts." He wasn't rescuing her yet. That mattered. Compassion without honesty would feel fake. Everyone in the room could sense he was walking somewhere difficult. Then the second twist arrived. Officer Donnelly cleared his throat. "Your Honor, there is an addendum I filed after reviewing the footage for this hearing." The prosecutor turned. "I wasn't aware." "It's attached to the supplemental report," Donnelly said. Clerk Sheila found the page, eyes widening slightly as she scanned it. Judge Caprio read it next. Officer states he later confirmed the minor, Mateo Vega, was triaged at 2:19 a.m. for severe respiratory distress and received immediate nebulizer treatment. So Marisol hadn't exaggerated. She hadn't dramatized. In fact, the timeline made her frantic behavior more understandable, not less. She parked at 2:17. Mateo was triaged at 2:19. That meant if she had driven away to find legal parking, then carried him from a distant lot, those lost minutes could have mattered. But wait, the addendum had one more line. The judge read, "Officer further states Ms. Vega used hostile language during contact and refused initial instruction to reposition vehicle after medical staff assumed care." Marisol closed her eyes. There it was, her breaking point preserved in ink. "I told you," she muttered. "You all get the full package with me, not just the nice parts." That line hit harder than she knew, because hidden inside it was shame. Real shame. Not for needing help, but for how hard life had made her. Hit that subscribe button if you believe people should be judged by the full truth, not the worst 10 seconds of their life. Judge Caprio asked, "Once your son was inside, why didn't you move the vehicle?" Marisol looked up, "Because my hands stopped working." Silence. She stared straight ahead and forced the words out. "I know how that sounds. I'm not saying literally stopped like I forgot where the keys were. I'm saying I got back in the driver's seat and I was shaking so bad I couldn't turn them. My daughter had to take them from me and say, 'Mom, look at me. It's over. He's breathing.' I wasn't trying to defy the officer. I was trying not to fall apart in front of my kids." Officer Donnelly, to his credit, did not roll his eyes. He just said, "She was visibly upset." That was when Judge Caprio asked the question that opened the story wider than anyone expected. "Ms. Vega, why was your registration renewal unpaid?" It sounded procedural, but it reached down to the root. Marisol inhaled. "Because I paid $312 for Mateo's inhaler refill and Alina's blood thinner in the same week, and then my transmission started slipping, and I had to choose what couldn't wait." "You had no one to help." At that, a shadow crossed her face so fast it almost disappeared. "Their father helps when disappearing counts." The room gave a bitter half-laugh. Even Judge Caprio's mouth tightened. The facts came out piece by piece. Marisol's ex-husband, Marcus Vega, had been court-ordered to pay child support but had missed 7 of the last 9 months. One payment cleared, then was reversed. Another came in partial cash through his sister. Marisol did not have family money, not hidden anywhere, not coming later. Alina's stroke had ended the small home cleaning work Marisol's mother used to do, and the apartment elevator had been broken since February. Why? Meaning every grocery bag, every stroller, every therapy tote got carried up 3 flights by hand. Marisol's surgical sterilization job paid $21.40 an hour before taxes, but her hours fluctuated. On good weeks she reached 40. On bad weeks she got sent home early. Kayla watched the twins after school so Marisol could run delivery orders until dinner. Jadon had quit AAU basketball because the fees were impossible. Mateo missed 18 school days that winter. Lily still asked if their van was the sick car, because it always seemed to be carrying somebody to an appointment. Outrage was easy at the start of this story because a ticket looked simple. A red-striped lane, a rule, a fine. But now the room was seeing the invisible machinery behind one violation. The kind of life where a small legal mistake is never just a small legal mistake. Drop a comment telling us the exact moment you stopped seeing Marisol as reckless and started seeing her as exhausted. Because, for a lot of people in that courtroom, that moment had already happened. Judge Caprio asked whether there was anyone present who could speak to the night in question. Marisol turned to the gallery and nodded toward Kayla. The teenager walked forward carefully, one hand pressed over the other to stop them from shaking. There is something about a child speaking in a courtroom that changes the air. Adults stop fidgeting. Pens stop clicking. Even Frank DeLuca, who had the granite face of a man who'd seen everything, softened at the eyes. Kayla stated her name for the record. Kayla Alina Vega, 15. She spoke quietly at first, then stronger. She said Mateo had started wheezing around 1:40 a.m. after a day of coughing and fever. The home nebulizer machine was making a strange rattling noise and smelled hot, so Marisol used the rescue inhaler, but it didn't work enough. Rain was coming down hard. The twins were asleep. Their grandmother Alina could not safely manage stairs alone at that hour, and there was no one to stay with her. Marisol bundled everyone into the van. Jadon stayed home with Alina because someone needed to call 911 if Alina fell. Kayla rode in front. By the time they reached the hospital, Mateo was doing the thing where he looked scared to breathe. Judge Caprio asked, "Did your mother seem angry when she parked?" Kayla shook her head. "No, sir. She seemed scared. Then the officer came up and she got loud because scared is what angry looks like on my mom." You could feel people absorb that line. Scared is what angry looks like on my mom. That was one of those shareable truths that could travel far beyond a courtroom, because it named something a lot of families live with and almost nobody says well. The judge looked down, then back up. "That is a very mature observation." Kayla gave a humorless little smile. "I'm the oldest." And there was another truth. The prosecutor, who up to that point had played the case straight, asked whether Kayla remembered how long the van remained in the lane. Kayla answered honestly, "Longer than it should have. I had to help Mateo out and my mom was crying in the driver's seat after. So yeah, it was too long." That honesty mattered. It made the whole room trust her. Then came a choice moment. Judge Caprio said, "Ms. Vega, you have two options as I see it. I can treat this purely as a legal violation with emergency mitigation, or I can consider a broader equitable resolution if your record supports it. But if I do that, I need absolute honesty from you. No missing facts, no dramatics, no blame shifting. Can you do that?" Marisol stared at him. "Yes." He waited a beat. "Have you had prior traffic matters?" She closed her eyes. 1. The clerk checked the system. 2. Your Honor, a parking meter citation in 2023 and a stop sign ticket in 2021. A murmur again. Marisol exhaled through her nose, frustrated with herself. "The meter was when my mother was in rehab, and the stop sign, I rolled it. I did. It's not like I'm proud." "So when you said 1, that was inaccurate?" "Yes." Now her voice cracked. "Because every time I say the whole truth, it sounds worse before it sounds real." That was the emotional breakthrough no one expected. Not tears yet, not collapse, just the moment a person stops trying to manage how they appear and starts telling the truth as it is. Judge Caprio leaned back and said one of the lines people would later quote all over the internet. "Ms. Vega, the truth often does sound worse before it sounds real. That is why courage is required to tell it." Nobody wrote that down, but everybody remembered it. At around the 40-minute mark of the hearing, something unusual happened. Clerk Sheila Martin received a message from the side desk and leaned toward the bench. "Your Honor, there is a woman outside asking if she may address the court regarding the December 14 incident. Says her father was the patient in the sedan that had to go around." Now the story opened again. "Bring her in, Jay," Judge Caprio said. The woman who entered wore a camel wool coat, carried a leather tote, and looked like she had not planned to spend part of her morning in municipal court. Her name was Angela Russo, 38, a dental hygienist from Cranston. She apologized for interrupting and explained that on December 14 she had driven her father, Leonard Russo, age 74, to the pediatric wing side entrance because the main adult emergency intake was backed up, and a nurse on the phone had told her where a transport aide could meet them faster. Leonard had kidney failure and was semi-conscious. Angela remembered the gray van in the lane because she'd had to pull around it, and because, in her words, "For 1 second I was furious." The courtroom got still again. Here it was, a victim with a voice, a real consequence. Angela continued, "I was angry because when your parent is slumped over next to you and you're trying to keep them awake, every obstacle feels personal. I thought, who parks like that? Who does that to other sick people?" She turned and looked directly at Marisol. "And then I saw her." Angela described a woman sprinting out in socks that didn't match, one pink and one black hair hanging in her face, carrying a child whose chest was pulling inward with every breath. Angela said she heard the child wheeze even through the rain. She saw the teenage girl trying to wake the twins without scaring them. She saw Officer Donnelly speaking firmly but not aggressively. And most of all, she saw something in Marisol's face she recognized immediately. It was not selfishness, Angela said. It was panic. The room felt suspended. My father died 6 weeks later, Angela went on, and now her own voice shook. Not from that night. The doctors gave us more time. But I keep thinking about how easy it is to remember only the inconvenience somebody causes you, and not the terror they were living inside at that same moment. So when I got the hearing notice because my statement was in the hospital security file, I came because I did not want this mother remembered as just the woman who blocked a lane. That was the forgiveness twist, and it hit like thunder. Marisol's face crumpled. She covered her eyes with the heel of her hand, shoulders shuddering once. No sound yet, just impact, deep impact. In the gallery, a woman whispered, "Oh my God." Even Officer Donnelly blinked hard and looked down at the floor. Like this video, if you believe compassion from the right person at the right time, can change the entire meaning of a story. Judge Caprio thanked Angela Russo and asked the question everyone was wondering. Ms. Russo, are you saying the violation should be excused entirely? Angela thought before answering. No, Your Honor, the lane mattered. My father mattered too. I'm saying this should be treated like a human emergency, not like a careless act. That line reframed everything. Not careless, human emergency. Judge Caprio then requested the hospital surveillance clip. If the body cam showed the interaction, the fixed security footage would show timing and movement. The clerk warned that the quality was poor, but the judge wanted it anyway. The screen shifted to a wide-angle view from above the pediatric entrance. Timestamp 02/1658. Rain silvered the pavement. The Sienna jerked in too fast and stopped crooked. Driver's door flew open. Marisol ran around to the passenger side, tugged the door, pulled Mateo out against her chest and nearly slipped. Kayla followed with a plastic grocery bag and inhaler spacer. She shouted toward the entrance, but the automatic doors did not open immediately. A few seconds later, they did. Marisol vanished inside with Mateo. Kayla rushed back to check the twins, then bent down over something in the middle row. The camera had no audio, but her movements were frantic and practiced. Then came the clip that would have destroyed Marisol if the hearing ended there. At 02:19:04, another sedan pulled toward the entrance and had to swing wide around the Sienna. It was Angela Russo's car. Judge Caprio watched it twice. Yes, there was obstruction. Yes, it created a risk. Yes, the city had a point. But then at 02:20:13, the same surveillance video showed something no one expected. Marisol emerged alone, staggered toward the driver's side, opened the door, sat down, and then stayed perfectly still. Not texting, not arguing, not refusing, just frozen. Through the windshield, faint but visible, she lifted both hands to her face and folded inward over the steering wheel. The entire courtroom understood in the same second. This was not defiance. It was collapse. Everyone in the room knew that if this clip ever hit social media with context, millions would watch it and recognize the exact frame where survival ran out of adrenaline. Judge Caprio let the silence breathe. Finally, he asked, "Officer Donnelly, did you observe Ms. Vega in distress?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you still cited her?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Because the lane was blocked. But I noted emergency circumstances." Caprio nodded, "which is why your addendum matters." Now the hearing crossed the halfway point, and the tension shifted from fact-finding to judgment. Everyone knew the facts. The question was no longer what happened. The question was what justice looks like when law and mercy are both telling the truth. Share this with someone who still believes mercy is weakness, because this next part proves it takes far more wisdom than punishment ever does. Judge Caprio began asking about the van itself. The inspection sticker had expired in October. Why? Marisol explained that the van failed inspection because of a rear suspension issue and the cracked taillight. Repair estimate, $684. She had tried to save up, then Alina needed a new walker not fully covered by insurance. Then Mateo's inhaler refill. Then the heating bill. Then Christmas for 5 kids, which she solved with 3 thrifted board games, 2 discount dolls, and a used bike someone from church dropped off without leaving their name. "What was your bank balance the morning after the citation?" the judge asked. Marisol shuffled papers, found a statement, and handed it over. After rent, it was $46.12. The courtroom made a noise again, but softer this time. Not judgment, recognition. The prosecutor then pointed out a legal complication. "Your Honor, while the emergency circumstances are compelling, we do still have the failure to appear and the expired inspection as separate matters." That was true. Compassion in one area did not automatically erase everything. Another consequence moment. Judge Caprio turned back to Marisol. "Did you make any effort to contact the court before the missed January appearance?" "I called once from work hold music and got disconnected. Then my mother fell in the bathroom that week and she stopped. I just ran out of hands." Ran out of hands. Another shareable quote, and not because it was polished, because it was accurate. The judge pressed gently. "That is understandable. It is not sufficient, but it is understandable." Marisol nodded. "I know." "And the inspection?" "I know that too." "Do you know why inspection laws exist?" "To stop people from driving unsafe cars." "Was your van safe?" "No." "Did you still drive it?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked straight at him now, all pretense burned off. "Because poor choices start to sound like impossible choices when everything important is on the other side of a working engine." Nobody moved. That one just sat there in the room like a truth too heavy to toss aside. Judge Caprio looked at the gallery, then back at the file, then at Frank DeLuca. "Is there a certified mechanic in the room today by any chance?" A few people smiled at the familiar unpredictability of his courtroom. Sometimes his questions went places statutes didn't. For a second, no one answered. Then a man in a dark green work jacket near the rear lifted his hand awkwardly. "Samir Patel," he said. "I own Patel Auto on Broad Street." Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow. "Were you here on another matter, Mr. Patel?" "Parking ticket, Your Honor. Meter expired while I was picking up parts." Laughter broke the tension for the first time all morning. Caprio asked, "Would you be willing, after court, to look at Ms. Vega's inspection report and tell us whether the vehicle can be made roadworthy at a reduced cost?" Samir nodded. "I can look." Marisol turned in shock. "I'm not asking for charity." Judge Caprio answered with another quotable line. "Sometimes accepting help is not charity. Sometimes it is cooperation with grace." That was the moment her face changed, really changed. The hardness left first, then the guardedness. Then the old embarrassment came back, because accepting help can feel worse than punishment to people who have spent years surviving without it. But the hearing still had another twist waiting. Clerk Sheila Martin leaned into her microphone. "Your Honor, there is one additional note from Family Services attached to Ms. Vega's file due to vehicle registration warning." The judge frowned. "Read it." Sheila did, and the room turned cold. "Informational notice only. If vehicle is towed or registration suspended, custodial parent has indicated likely inability to maintain current employment and transport dependent minors to medical care. School attendance disruption anticipated." That meant the system already knew what this fine could trigger. The consequences were not hypothetical, they were documented. Miss the wrong deadline, lose the van. Lose the van, lose shifts. Lose shifts, miss rent, risk eviction. One civil citation had grown teeth. Outrage flared again, but this time it wasn't aimed at Marisol. It was aimed at how quickly bureaucratic pressure can turn crisis into collapse. Hit that subscribe button if you believe sometimes the real villain is the way ordinary people get trapped between rules they understand and reality's tea. Hose rules never prepared for. At around what would have been the 6,000-word mark if this were written as a script inside a script, the climax began. You could feel it. Every hearing has a moment where the facts end and the soul of the room shows up. This was that moment. Judge Caprio folded his hands and spoke slowly. "Ms. Vega, I need you to listen carefully. You did violate the emergency access restriction. You also operated a vehicle that was overdue for inspection. Those facts are not erased by hardship, but hardship does matter when assessing intent, culpability, and remedy." Marisol nodded through tears she still hadn't let fall. He continued, "I also need to address your demeanor. You came into this courtroom angry. I know. You were defensive with the clerk. I know. You were hostile with the officer that night." Her voice barely came out. "I know." Why? And there it was, the deepest question, not what happened. Why did you become this version of yourself? Marisol inhaled, tried to speak, failed, and tried again. "Because if I act scared, people talk over me. If I act polite, they tell me to wait. If I act grateful, they assume I'll survive anything. Angry gets attention faster." Nobody in that room would ever forget that answer. Judge Caprio's face softened with something like sorrow. "Yes," he said, "but it also makes people miss your pain." That was the moment of realization, the dialogue shift, her posture changed, her shoulders dropped, the fight left her voice. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm tired of sounding like the worst thing about me." A woman near the front row started crying openly now. Frank DeLuca handed her a tissue without looking directly at her, still trying to pretend he wasn't moved. Then came the "but wait, there's more" twist. Kayla, who had gone back to her seat, stood again. "Your Honor, may I say one more thing?" Caprio nodded. Kayla stepped forward holding a white pharmacy envelope and a zip-top sandwich bag full of crumpled cash, ones and fives and quarters. "Me and my brothers were saving this to help pay the fine. It's $83.70. Mateo wanted to give his birthday money too." The entire courtroom broke, not metaphorically, emotionally. You could hear people exhale in disbelief. One man covered his face. Marisol spun around, horrified. "Kayla, no, no, baby, put that away." But Kayla kept going. "I just need you to know we were trying. We're not asking to get out of everything. We just don't want her to think she failed." Judge Caprio looked at the bag for a long second. Then he said the sentence that people would clip, caption, and replay 1,000,000 times if they saw it. "A mother who gets 5 children through a winter like this has not failed." Marisol collapsed into tears. Not movie tears, not pretty tears, the kind that come from the center of the chest and take your shoulders with them. Her hands covered her face. Her body folded forward against the podium. The microphone caught the sound of one broken sob, and then the room was so still you could hear somebody's bracelet slide down their wrist. This was the justice-served satisfaction moment, but not because anyone was being crushed, because the truth had finally landed where it belonged. Like this video, if you believe sometimes the most powerful sentence in a courtroom is not a punishment, but recognition. Judge Caprio waited until Marisol could breathe again. Then he asked Frank DeLuca to bring her water. Frank did it gently, placing the paper cup on the podium rail like he was handling something sacred. When Marisol wiped her eyes and tried to apologize, the judge stopped her with a raised hand. "No, listen to me now. Responsibility remains, but I will not allow this court to become the final shove that sends your family over the edge." The prosecutor did not object. Officer Donnelly did not object. Angela Russo sat silently with both hands clasped under her chin. Judge Caprio laid out his ruling in a way that turned law into mercy without pretending the law didn't exist. He dismissed the failure to appear fee in full due to documented medical caregiving conflict. He converted the emergency lane citation from the full fine to court-recorded emergency mitigation, with a nominal civil assessment of $35, acknowledging the real obstruction, but also the immediate medical necessity. He suspended the inspection penalty for 30 days on condition that the vehicle be repaired and proof of inspection submitted. He waived administrative costs. Then he looked at the sandwich bag of money. The $35, he said, will not be paid from children's birthday cash. A fresh wave of emotion moved through the room. Marisol shook her head quickly. I can pay it. I can, just not today. I can do a payment plan. Please don't think I'm asking for. Ms. Vega, he interrupted softly, I didn't say you were asking. He reached into his robe pocket, then paused, inced. Eed of pulling anything out, he turned to the gallery. I am not soliciting. I am making an observation. There are moments when a community can either watch a family drown in slow motion or decide to become a shore. For half a second, nobody moved. Then Angela Russo stood up first. I'll cover it. Officer Donnelly, to everyone's surprise, said, I'll split it. Samir Patel added, and I'll inspect the van for free after repairs. That was the unexpected compassion moment layered on top of the verdict. One by one, people who had entered the room as strangers were now participating in the rescue of a family they'd spent the first 10 minutes silently judging. Judge Caprio smiled faintly. Well, it appears the $35 is resolved. Marisol shook her head in disbelief, crying harder now. Why would you do that? Angela answered before anyone else could, because someone did it for me once. That line landed so perfectly, it hardly needed anything around it. But there was still another turn ahead. The story was not finished at the tears. Great courtroom stories never end at the ruling. They end when the ruling proves it changed something beyond the room. Before moving to the next case, Judge Caprio asked one final question. Ms. Vega, if I show you mercy today, what will you do with it? Everyone listened. She wiped her face with both palms and forced herself upright. I'll stop using anger as my first language. I'll get the van fixed. I'll keep Mateo's machine working. And when I'm standing again, I'll be the person who shows up for somebody else. That was the redemption promise. Not dramatic, not polished, real enough to matter. Caprio nodded. Good, because mercy is not a reward for the perfect. It is an investment in the possible. There was your fifth, maybe sixth, wildly shareable quote. As Marisol stepped away from the podium, the gallery didn't clap. The court wouldn't allow that. But the energy in the room changed so completely it felt louder than applause. People smiled at her through tears. Frank DeLuca pointed her quietly toward the clerk's side desk where paperwork would be updated. Samir Patel introduced himself. Angela Russo touched Marisol's arm once and said, Take care of him, meaning Mateo. Officer Donnelly gave a small nod that, in its own restrained way, looked like respect. And if you think that was the end, wait. Drop a comment telling us whether you think Officer Donnelly did the right thing by issuing the citation that night. Because this story only works if we're honest enough to hold two truths at once. 3 weeks later, on May 6, 2026, a white envelope arrived at Chambers addressed in careful block letters. Return address, Messer Street. Inside was a thank you note on lined notebook paper, a copy of an inspection certificate, and 3 photographs printed at a pharmacy kiosk. Judge Caprio's staff logged it with the case file because what happened next mattered. The note began, Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted to send proof because I said I would. That alone told you something had shifted. People living in pure chaos don't usually have the luxury of follow-through, but Marisol had followed through. Samir Patel's shop had repaired the suspension at cost after discovering the actual damage was less severe than the original estimate. He replaced the cracked taillight with a salvaged matching unit from a donor vehicle. Another customer at the shop, after overhearing the story, covered the labor difference without telling Marisol until the bill came back lower than expected. The van passed inspection on April 29. The first photograph showed Kayla standing next to the Sienna holding the green inspection sticker package like it was a diploma. The second showed Mateo with a new nebulizer machine provided through a pediatric assistance program Dr. Naomi Feldman's office helped expedite. The third showed Lily and Luna buckled into car seats, grinning under a handmade sign that said, "Mom's van is legal." If you believe small victories can feel bigger than miracles when a family has been hanging by a thread, like this video right now. The letter went on. Marisol wrote that she had apologized in person to Officer Donnelly when she saw him outside the clerk's office after a follow-up filing. She wrote that Angela Russo had reached out and connected her with a church pantry in Cranston that quietly helped with groceries twice that month. She wrote that Kayla had gone back to dance practice after a year away because a local studio owner heard the story through a friend and offered a scholarship spot. Jadon rejoined a rec basketball program. Alina's therapy transport was back on schedule. Mateo had not had another midnight ER run since the hearing, though Marisol admitted she still woke up 3 times a night just to listen at his door. Then came the line that made everyone in chambers pause. "You did not just lower a fine, you interrupted a collapse." That was the transformation proof. T was what mercy had done. But the story spread even wider in the months that followed, not because someone tried to make Marisol famous, but because moments like this travel through ordinary conversation faster than headlines. Samir told another mechanic. Angela told her sister. A clerk mentioned it to a cousin. A school counselor heard from Kayla. A nurse recognized the name. Piece by piece, the case became one of those local stories people repeat by saying, "Did you hear about the single mother with 5 kids and the judge who really saw her?" By July, Marisol had picked up a second certification module through her hospital contractor, increasing her hourly wage. Not by a lot, but enough. Enough is a beautiful word when life has taught you to live beneath it. She cut back on delivery shifts so she could sleep more than 4 hours at a time. Mateo's asthma action plan was taped to the refrigerator in color-coded steps. Alina could manage the apartment stairs better with a new rail installed by a volunteer church group. Kayla no longer kept the sandwich bag of emergency cash under her mattress. Marisol found it one day and made her put it in a mason jar labeled "dance shoes." That alone could make you cry if you understood what it meant for a family to move from survival money to future money. Around that same time, a local youth mentoring program invited Marisol to speak to a group of teen caregivers. She almost said no. Public speaking felt ridiculous for someone who still had overdue laundry and a gas light always flirting with empty. But Kayla convinced her. "Tell the truth the way you did in court," she said. That worked. So Marisol stood in a rec center room on Broad Street wearing a clean white blouse she borrowed from Angela Russo and told a circle of teenagers, "If fear has made you loud, that doesn't make you bad. But if somebody offers you mercy, don't waste it pretending you never needed it." There was another quote, another lesson, another proof that the right kind of justice does not end with a gavel, it keeps echoing. Share this with someone who needs hope tonight, because this next update is the one that proves the story did not fade after the tears. In September, nearly 5 months after the hearing, Judge Caprio received another letter. This one included a school essay written by Marisol Vega in 3rd grade handwriting. The prompt had been, "Write about a hero you know." Mateo wrote about his mother. He described how she drove fast in the rain when he could not breathe, how she fights sickness and bills, and how the nice judge made her cry but in a good way. Then came the sentence that would stay with everyone who read it. "My mom is loud when she is scared but soft when we sleep." That single line captured her whole arc better than any adult analysis could. By then, Marisol had done something no one in that courtroom would have predicted in the first 5 minutes of the hearing. She began volunteering one Saturday a month at a legal aid intake clinic, helping other parents organize documents before court. Not because she suddenly had free time. She still didn't. But because she remembered the humiliation of carrying a torn envelope full of papers and feeling like her entire life had been reduced to proof. She would sit beside mothers and grandfathers and nervous young men and say, "Put the medical stuff on top. Keep the dates in order. And when the judge asks a direct question, answer the whole truth, even if it makes you sound worse before it sounds real." The first time she repeated that last line, Kayla laughed and said, "That's your courtroom quote now." And she was right. One October afternoon, Marisol brought all 5 children plus Alina to Patel Auto for an oil change special. Samir walked out wiping his hands on a red shop rag and found Mateo showing the twins how to count tire treads with pennies. Jadon asked if old brake rotors could be turned into wall art. Kayla was filling out a dance competition waiver. Alina sat in the passenger seat smiling that slow, stroke recovery smile that takes work but means everything. Marisol leaned against the hood of the now legal Sienna and looked, for the first time in a long while, like a woman standing inside her life instead of sprinting behind it. Samir later said that was the exact moment he knew the judge's decision had done what punishment never could. It gave a struggling family enough stability to become visible to themselves again. Now let's be honest. Not every story ends like this. Not every fine gets reduced. Not every courtroom has a judge willing to look past posture and into pain. Not every officer files an addendum that helps. Not every stranger like Angela Russo walks back into the place where she first felt wronged and chooses compassion instead of resentment. That is exactly why this story matters so much. Because it shows what happens when every person in a system decides, even briefly, to remain human. Like this video. If you believe justice should protect order without forgetting suffering. The most talked about part of the hearing, the part people repeated over and over, was not actually the crying. It was the sequence before it, the hard shell, the body cam, the note from Kayla, the woman whose father had been delayed choosing grace, the judge refusing both easy punishment and easy sentimentality. Viewers love courtroom drama because they think it's about the moment someone gets exposed. But the best courtroom moments are about the moment everyone sees more than they expected. That is what went viral emotionally here, whether or not a camera clip ever crossed the internet. Recognition went viral. Complexity went viral. Mercy, earned through truth, became the thing people couldn't stop talking about. Months later, when asked what she remembered most, Angela Russo did not mention the ruling amount. She said, "I remember that there was a point when nobody in that room wanted to be the person they were in the first 10 minutes. Think about that. A courtroom full of strangers realizing they had judged too fast. That kind of collective acknowledgement is rare. It is also powerful, because it means the transformation was not only Marisol's. It belonged to everyone watching." Officer Donnelly, according to a later informal conversation relayed through clerk staff, changed one thing after that hearing. He still cited blocked emergency lanes. He still enforced them. But after Marisol's case, when he encountered frantic parents at hospital drop-offs, he began calling inside first before escalating when immediate distress was visible. Law with judgment. Procedure with eyes open. That matters. And Judge Caprio, he did what he always did in the moments that made people trust him most. He did not treat compassion like a sentimental exception. He treated it like disciplined wisdom. There is a difference. Sentiment ignores harm. Wisdom sees harm and still asks what outcome will actually make the community safer, stronger, and more just in the long run. Crushing Marisol under fees would not have made Providence safer. Helping her stabilize the van, the medical care, and the family did. That is why his final words from that day stayed with everybody. As Marisol started to step away for the last time, still wiping tears, Judge Caprio called her back just long enough to say 7 words. Go take care of your family. 7 words. Simple, quiet. No performance. No sermon. But they landed with the force of a benediction. Because what she had needed all along was not somebody telling her she was worthless or somebody pretending she had done nothing wrong. She needed somebody in authority to see the full picture and then clear a path forward. Go take care of your family. That was not an escape from responsibility. That was responsibility restored to its rightful purpose. Marisol later wrote that those 7 words hit her harder than the reduced fine, because they reminded her she was still allowed to be a mother before she was reduced to a case number. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done if you were sitting on that bench, because there are people who still argue the ticket should have stood in full, and people who say it should have been erased entirely. There is one more image you need to see in your mind before this story ends. It is early evening in November. The sky over Providence goes dark just after 4:30, and cold starts climbing up from the sidewalks. Outside a small apartment building on Messer Street, that old Toyota Sienna is parked legally at the curb under a working street lamp. The inspection sticker glints faintly on the windshield. Through the third-floor kitchen window, you can see warm yellow light and the blurry silhouettes of 6 people moving around a table. Marisol is inside helping Mateo with homework while Lily and Luna argue over crayons. Kayla is pinning up her hair for dance. Jadon is laughing at something Alina said. A pot lid rattles on the stove. Nothing about the scene would look dramatic to a stranger walking by. That is the point. Real justice often looks like ordinary life being allowed to continue. And sometimes that is the greatest miracle of all. Because behind that ordinary evening is a chain of decisions. A mother chose to drive through rain when her son could not breathe. An officer enforced the law but documented the truth. A judge refused to stop at first impressions. A grieving daughter chose empathy. A mechanic offered dignity instead of pity. A courtroom became, for 1 hour, a community. And 5 children slept that night in a home that was a little less afraid. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button if you believe mercy should never be mistaken for weakness. Like this video, if you think more courts should remember the human being standing behind the paperwork. And share this with someone who needs to hear that one act of wisdom can interrupt an entire family's collapse. What makes this story unforgettable is not that Marisol cried. Plenty of people cry in court. What makes it unforgettable is why she cried. She cried because, for one of the first times in a very long time, authority did not arrive in her life only to punish her. It arrived, told the truth, and then refused to make her suffering worse just because it legally could. That kind of justice does not make a society softer, it makes it wiser. So here's the question we want you to answer in the comments. When someone breaks a rule in the middle of a real emergency, should the system focus first on punishment or on what outcome prevents the next crisis? We want to hear your take. And if this story moved you, stay with us, because in the next video we're covering the moment a homeless veteran walked into court expecting jail time and left with something nobody in that room saw coming.